You're listening to a Meatsmith Harvest. This is the podcast that encourages and equips you to grow your home around the harvest. This Farmstead Meatsmith production is made possible by you. If you like it, please consider supporting our team by going to patreon.com/Meatsmith and donating at a level you'd enjoy giving at. Your gift helps us increase the quality and quantity of all our free media education. Thank you, and happy harvesting.
And thanks again for agreeing to be on the show.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Thank you for seeking us out.
Hey, actually, it was one of my podcast listeners that recommended that I have you guys on the show.
Cool.
So that's one of the cool things about getting a chance to do this. I love it when I get recommendations for people that I hadn't heard of or met before, and then I love their content.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. That's good stuff.
Sheared is the correct way to pronounce your last name, right?
Yes, sheared. Yeah, with the D on the end. Yep.
Well, I can't think. That's like a really good name to have as a processor.
I know. It like all last names, the etymology is kind of fuzzy, so you could pick a couple different meanings. But I'm going to go ahead and pick, the one that is closer to cutting and shearing, because that's what I do. Instead of the pot shard, a piece of a pot.
If I was to do anything other than the podcast I'm doing now, I'd probably do it on names, just because there's so much variation and interest to it. And that's one of the things I enjoy about this show is I meet people there's always a story to it.
Yeah.
And most of the time people know it, thankfully.
Yeah.
We'll get right into it. Brandon Sheared, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Starting out, would you mind sharing a brief biographical sketch with the audience?
My name is Brandon Sheared. I am the founder, operator, floor sweeper, grease trap cleaner, slaughterman, and butcher of Farmstead Meatsmith, which is it's a personal slaughter business. So basically, we provide the service of education and meat processing to very small scale farmers. So the backyard pig, the backyard chicken flock. We also offer lots of education in the very same thing to teach people how to do it themselves. And I came from academia. I'm an English major, and I even went to grad school and got a master's degree, and I was going to keep going. I was going to stay in academia my whole life and teach English literature. From the Renaissance era in particular. John Milton was my guy. But I gradually started becoming a little wearied of the academic environment, which happened to coincide with the time that I met Lauren, my wife. And we both wanted to do something outside of academia to make ourselves better for the ivory tower. I didn't feel like I was qualified to be a professor if I had no experience outside of the academy. It just seemed a little shallow, And so we left planning to go back, and that was 11 years ago, 6 children later, and a move out of state and a new family business in that time. So we haven't gone back. I don't know if we're going to. But really, we came up to Washington State. I worked at a farm for a couple years just to make ends meet. And it was really when I quit that job that we discovered our calling, in the sense that people kept calling us on the phone to slaughter their livestock. And it was a service that was in demand. It's a skill that I sort of learned and taught myself on the farm that I was working at. And so that became our business. Over the next 10 years, it really evolved into Farmstead Meatsmith.
in doing the research for the show, one of the things I thought that was really cool about your bio is the work in Renaissance English literature, because I'm a nerd, and that was one of the things that has always been in my wheelhouse, and I've always found fascinating. And looking over some of your content, I can really, I see the influence, I think would be the word I'd use.
Oh, good. That's
just
great.
Because you speak of your work in such a term of reverence. You have a good vocabulary for describing what you do. And that's one of the things I think is remarkable about your brand, is that you have that amazing facility of description that most people, I would argue, in the processing and harvesting industry don't. They don't know how to describe it well. They don't have the right words. So it comes off oftentimes seeming like a very cold business, I guess would be the word I would choose to use.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's due to a lot of factors, because I experienced the same thing. I think on the kind of the scale that I operate in my little tiny industry, which is really kind of small, of the mobile slaughtermen going from farm to farm, those men and women in that industry they're kind of tired. There's not enough of them. They're spread really thin, and the times have changed around them in the sense that a lot of them, and this is just drawing from my experience, so I know there's exceptions, but they are still charging 1980s prices for their services. And
oh, wow.
And a lot of that is because that's when they started their business. And so they're training their sons to inherit their business, or they have a few employees who are making more than the owners are. And so much of it comes down to this, what I find is they're truly kind of deeply, like over the period of decades, exhausted. And they're not getting paid what they need to, honestly. And that wears you down, and at the very least makes you less inspired about your own work, which is really sad, because then you can't describe it to people in a winsome manner. And yeah, that's been an interesting dynamic, and it's been fun for me, because I am a language nerd too. I like listening to them and working alongside a lot of these guys that have been out in this industry for decades, because they describe things with colloquialisms, which can be really sometimes startlingly precise, right? And sometimes completely like I have no idea what they're talking about. So that has been fun. But I find that coming out of English Renaissance literature, what was so fun to me and what is still really inspiring is I can't find the bottom of what it is to slaughter an animal for food. There's no bottom to that. It's one of those infinite things that you can just keep trying to verbalize and describe and situate in a value system, in a worldview, or even in like a biological order. How do we situate this incredibly brazen act whereby because it is an assertive act to kill an animal and to eat its flesh. That is not passive, right? And so it's just, I find what a lot of my work is you learn a skill, a task, whatever it may be, like from skinning a sheep's head to taking the life of a pig to how you hold a chicken, to facilitate a smooth slaughter. You learn these things, or I did, with my body first, because you're bounded by these practical, real-world limitations. Like if I hold the chicken like this, then it flips out more and it's harder to get into the cone and it's harder to deliver the kill. Whereas if I hold it like this, then it goes smoother and there's calmness and there's less of a struggle, so it feels like less of a coercive death. And all of these things, they just arise from the practical limitations, and it's very much way after the fact, months or years, that I begin to try to describe what's going on verbally and analyze it and maybe develop a principle that I can communicate to someone else that then they can use to go do it. But it didn't originate in my mind. It originated in just kind of throwing your body into these very physical, demanding tasks and figuring out how to do it efficiently. And that is just this very fertile seedbed for contemplation and deriving a philosophy. I guess it's really Aristotelian in that sense, maybe. But that's a constant preoccupation of mine. And
what you're describing is, sorry to interrupt, what you're describing is just so contrary to academia, too.
Yeah.
In a general, from what my understanding of academia as a general rule of thumb is, you learn a theory and then you teach that theory without ever really acting on it.
Yes.
Or there are fewer and fewer academics these days that actually practice. And so all they're doing is repeating and repeating and repeating, or, ooh, here's the new theory, and they continue to spout it without having the actual actions oftentimes to back up what they're talking about. So you've literally pivoted out of academia into real world, real work, and then you teach that. Because you're still teaching, which is one of the things I think is really cool about this.
Right. Yeah, I almost can't help myself. It's almost like it's of great benefit to me to teach, because that gives me the practice to use my verbal capacity to try to describe this stuff. And it's almost, like you say, it's really perspicacious. You learn the theory first, then you verbalize it, and it's backwards in so many ways. And maybe that's why I left ultimately. I don't know, but I think it might be. I learned the physical task first, and then I learned to verbalize it. And you stumble around with your words, right? You describe it wrongly sometimes. Mm-hmm. And you don't know that until you have to be able to make mistakes with your words and say it several times, several different ways, and try to teach it, several different ways. And then you run up against real world limitations and the error of your verbalization. And only then, finally, it's like the last step is the theory. After it's been purged through the practice, through the verbalization, and then you get this crystal, refined golden theory or principle. And I think that's really perspicacious, because in academia, I was frustrated by how much theories were flying around and how little good old-fashioned book knowledge there was. Like, no one loved Shakespeare. Loved him, and memorized him and quoted him. So that was a huge oversight to me,
I almost don't have words for that.
Yeah.
Which for most of my friends would be consider that like they're writing it down right now. This is what makes tea speechless. They'll save it for later.
Right. Yeah, it's reprehensible.
The hunt is up. How many people do you know you would say truly share your back to the land values? Or your passion for home-scale craft meat curing? Or simply love the multifaceted beauty of a good meal as obsessively as you do? Maybe a handful? At farmsteadmeatsmith.com, we've created an online community of hundreds of omnivores from around the world, and a platform for them to learn from and inspire one another. In addition to our major semi-annual hands-on educational event, The Family Pig, here at our Pacific Northwest homestead, over at farmsteadmeatsmith.com, we host a purely digital membership program with an archive of film and textual resources years deep now, for you to dive deeper into your food journey with. And both our classes and online program include access to our private community Facebook page for your continued education and fellowship. We've been told that our classes are life-changing and the membership program unparalleled in quality and quantity. To get a taste of our education, search farmsteadmeatsmith.com and our YouTube channel for our free films, conversations, and downloads. Explore how we and other meatsmiths across the globe may best come alongside you, putting the knife in your hand, article by article, and comment thread by comment thread, and can support you in building your home around the harvest. Please head to farmsteadmeatsmith.com today.
What are some of the myths you see about on-farm animal harvesting? Because I know this is something there is not as much of it as you might think would be necessary. And as you said, there aren't that many people doing it. So what are some of the myths that people think about this profession and about the slaughtering process on farm, and how do you reply to them?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of them, and it depends on how long people have been amidst their livestock. You know, the only reason I know I've experienced some of these myths is because I have possessed them myself and run up against them and had errors. And I think that the first one that was a big revelation to me was with regard to pig slaughter. And pigs are very complex animals. They all are, of course. But the first instinct, at least for most of us, especially if you're coming from a suburban environment where you have dogs and cats, is to separate the animal you're going to kill from its herd. And this is a bad idea. It's very interesting. I think that with pigs, their identity is with their sounder, right? That's their group of pigs. It's with their litter mates or their herd. And that is where all their sanity comes from. That's where their equanimity proceeds from. That's where their hierarchy is determined. And a pig outside of a hierarchy is not a pig. It's like it doesn't know. It has non-being. It's really confused. It's in a state of chaos. And so the impulse to separate a pig that you're going to kill so that the other pigs don't see the death is to both overestimate the pig's humanity, but to underestimate her intelligence. Like, I think that the pigs are not surprised by the death of another pig at all. It does not plunge them into an existential crisis because they don't, it's not because they're dumb. It just means that they do not perceive it as an injustice, as a slight of the universe against their kind, right? You have to be, I think there's something in consciousness that makes it so that you actually object to death on a fundamental, even moral level, which I think is true. But pigs are more receptive to this. And so the best thing you can do on a pig slaughter is lay the food out. All the pigs come up shoulder to shoulder, right there amidst their buddies, again, amidst their sounder, and you shoot the pig right in the middle. And all the other pigs might jump at the crack of the rifle just a little bit, but then they'll go right back to eating, and they'll probably eat the blood from the pig that you shot. And that's because for them, and arguably for humans too, but on a different level, the gun is not scary. It's not an existential threat. The knife doesn't mean death. My presence as the slaughterman doesn't indicate death. Death almost doesn't mean death to a pig. What means death is separation. Separation from the sounder. That is death. That is their life force. And the same thing with a sheep, right? And intimately knitted, almost like they have a collective consciousness, to the flock. You see this in all really strong herding animals. Like ducks have the same thing, mallard descent ducks. If you chase a flock of sheep and you split the flock, and part of the flock goes over here, and another part goes over here, but the flock that is on your right is kind of cornered in a fence corner. And if you walk towards the fence line, the flock on the right, rather than fleeing away from you, they will risk getting closer to you, whom they perceive as a predator, in order to join with the other flock. So they will come closer to death, right, in the predator, in order to rejoin the herd. That's how it's stronger than, it's their strongest impulse, I think, is to herd, to be together, such that they'll walk through the fire, to get there, to get back to their herd. Ducks will do the same exact thing. And I just think you have to have due regard for all of that, especially when you're slaughterman. And so much of my work is just trying to be docile to the cues that I'm getting from the animals, and try to alter my systems, my approach to killing them based on the cues I'm getting from them. Are they herding? Are they individual? Are they omnivorous? Are they herbivores? Are they carnivores? There's so many different elements that determine the most peaceful way to take their life.
So obviously, especially in today's day and age, we hear a lot of people talk about body language for people. So in essence, what you're doing is you're reading the body language of the animals.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's really, I feel like it's even more applicable in animals too, because I guess not with pigs. I'm trying to categorize it here. With poultry, with sheep, with goats, if you control the body, you control the mind with those animals. And it's very much so, it's literally a body language. If you want to talk to the livestock that you're going to kill, if you want to confer a calmness upon them, you don't think about their mind. Don't think about them abstracting their situation and then panicking. What you actually have to do is ensure that their body is calm, and then their mind will be calm as a consequence.
So in essence, they don't have any dissonance from the mind and body.
Yeah, I don't think so. I haven't thought about that way. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And an example would be with a sheep. This is why I have a lengthy service agreement that I give to our customers before I even show up. I kill sheep with just a knife, which is a whole nother conversation that we get into, but it's very much about controlling the body. And so in the service agreement, I say the sheep need to be tightly penned. And the idea is so that they can't run at all. They can't get up a gallop and create speed. So that when I go into the pen, I can grab a sheep, and hopefully, my first attempt at grasping them is successful. If I miss once, I think about it as a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is relaxed, 10 is panicked. And if I miss just one grasp, they go from a 1 to a 5, right? And then if I miss again, now we're at 8. And the more they feel, the more you chase them, the more they feel chased, The panic follows the act of chasing and flight. It's almost as if they find themselves fleeing and then decide to panic, And so it's very important for me to grasp them immediately. And you'll notice wow, the heart rate stays low, because you can feel the heart rate on their chest, lowish, because I don't want to be too rosy-eyed about this. And then you lay them down on their side and restraining the body. And the counterintuitive part, I think, for people that are just getting into it is that it is no kindness to the livestock, to the sheep in particular, to be reticent. And you have to, it would almost feel violent. But what you're doing is being very decisive, and you are removing any possibility that the sheep can get up and escape. Because if they have that possibility, then they'll exert themselves, and then they'll start to panic more. But if they don't have a plan B. Their plan A through Z is flee the predator. And if flight is decisively and utterly deprived of them, they will surrender, such that you can lay them down on their side and pull their head back, and you can hold them there for a few moments, and then stand up, and they will stay down. They surrender. And if you want them to get up again, you kind of have to nudge them and shake them up, and they'll pop right up. So just being docile to those cues, I think, is essential to being a good slaughterman.
You've also talked about on your website the farmer getting back 100% of the animal that's getting processed. I grew up with an organic grass-fed beef farm, so I know when you take them to the butcher, you don't necessarily get that full weight on the way back.
Right.
What do you do different in the butchering process? What are you keeping, and why?
Yeah, it really is a continuation of this attitude of receptive docility that I try to have on the slaughter, where rather than trying to impose and coerce the death on slaughter day, I try to actually cooperate with the animals as much as possible, so that I'm not going to say that they sacrifice themselves consciously, but they can certainly be icons of that. Insofar as I'm not, this is why I don't like using captive bolts on pigs, where you have to press a bolt to the pig's head and hit a trigger. most pigs, not all the time, but most really are not comfortable with this, something on their forehead. And so you tend to have to restrain them. You got to corner them with a pallet and try to hold them there. And now they're resisting. And then all of that is this harried effort at coercion to achieve the kind of kill that you have premeditated you want to achieve. Whereas if you just step back for a second and try to kill the pig on its terms in a way, so it's at its calmest moment, that's why I prefer the rifle. So that kind of receptivity I try to bring into the cutting of the meat when I look at a four-legged body, a quadruped beast. Mm-hmm. How can I cut that in a way that treats none of it as waste? Because none of it is waste. It was all surrendered by the pig, right? All of it. Mm-hmm. All of it is a reflection of your husbandry and the food that you put into the animal, cow or pig, whatever it may be. And so I think the challenge of butchery is not necessarily imposing cylindrical, boneless, skinless, geometric shapes on a very awkward four-legged carcass, right? It's to try to actually just receive the whole yield, which is not easy because it's more than you can eat, way more. That's the biggest hurdle that I find with most people that use our services is I just keep bringing boxes of meat out of the freezer and they're like, okay, it's still coming. And, I hand them a beautifully cleaned, hairless pig head. And it's like, gee, thanks, I think. And it's what it is the burden of abundance. It's actually more than you ask for. It's so much more that you actually, like all good gifts, you actually have to scramble a little bit to be able to receive it. You have to be more receptive and more grateful than you may have originally anticipated. And it's going to take work to utilize all of that. So when I butcher a pig, I don't create a mountain of trim in order to isolate one ideal cut. It's kind of like a fetish, that kind of butchery. And it's based on the commodity form of, what looks good in a deli case, and what is easy to cook. And so sort of the axiom is it can't be too demanding on the home cook. And we got to be able to get a good price for it, so it's got to look pretty. And that's where you get this denuding, heavy trim. And before you know it, you've removed 40 to 60% of hanging weight of some carcasses. And it's such an abominable waste. Whereas the burden of abundance is the home cook. This is really where the rubber meets the road, is in the kitchen, on the culinary end. Is you, rather than just cooking the things you like because it meets your preferences, you're actually endeavor to deserve the abundance that you have been given. And so you might have to try unfamiliar textures and cook things, and I dare say even acquire a taste that you didn't have, which is hard. We don't like to think about eating as a self-discipline. But like all self-disciplines, only then, it's truly rewarding. Then you actually have more taste than you thought you had. You didn't just like, lean, braised, dry chicken breast. You actually kind of like head cheese, and you like blood sausage, and you like the texture of liver when it's fresh. And suddenly you've really opened up your whole self as an omnivore to what the pig or the cow or whatever it may be has to offer.
I still remember one of my farm friends, they had just had a pig that was butchered, and they were doing that thing where people bought pig shares, and one person buying one of these shares asked, so innocently, much like Marie Antoinette asking, can't they eat cake? She asked, well, can I have my entire half of the pig cut into bacon?
I think so many farmers have experienced that. Very common. I know. I remember selling a share, and the customer really wanted spare ribs, and the share was one side of a pig, which means you get one rack of spare ribs.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I really tried to explain to that person before they picked it up that you're getting spare ribs, but a pig only has a finite quantity of ribs per side, and so that's all you will be getting. And it was still this dissonant experience when she picked it up. When I saw the package, like, just one? Yes. Just one. That's all they grow. It's understandable. Like you say, I think it is invincible ignorance. They just don't know. They're estranged from the anatomy of a pig.
What creates this dissonance from the animal and what we're eating? I know to a certain extent, I'm sure it's people just not necessarily wanting to think that they're eating something that was once living. But why? Historically speaking, we're in an anomaly. For most of history, people knew exactly what they were eating. They, most of the time, raised what they were eating. What was the change?
That is a good question. I would love to research that for years, because I can't lay all the blame at the feet of commodification, industrialized meat production. Because that industrialization, though, was rapid as far as historical processes go, but it was also gradual. And there was a time when you would walk into a butcher shop. Maybe you're not a farmer yourself, you don't raise your own livestock, but you still have the prowess of a home cook that is buttressed with this knowledge of the anatomy of your meat, the physiology of it, and even the husbandry of it. And a great example of this, you can see this reflected in old butcher shops, especially like in Europe. In Britain, they're hanging all of the whole carcasses where the customer can see it. I mean, just that alone. Sometimes hanging them outside, sides of beef and, dozens of birds during game season and whole lambs hanging out of doors under the porch. And this is not just out of convenience. It's because that actually catches the customer's eye, which today would be an actual deterrent.
Yeah.
Customers would be like, "Oh, filthy meat outside. How can you do this? This is not healthy." But no, what they were showing was the provenance of their meat, which presumes that the customer was savvy enough to discern it. You look at a fat, hind quarter of a cow and it's just covered in yellow fat. You're like, yes, that's a healthy animal. Whereas, you might not trust a butcher that didn't do that, because maybe by the time he's selling it to you, he's taken off, all of the ugly parts, or he's obfuscated the fact that it was kind of starving and it didn't really have any fat on it. And even, like spring lamb is a big deal. And the housewives, which used to be a hallowed, honored, able way to live as a housewife. Today, where especially women are expected to be bored with domesticity. There's this pressure, but it's the domestic management of your resources, of your food, of your meat is, I wish I could, that's all I could think about. That's my goal. I would love to be a housewife. But she would go to the butcher shop to buy her annual spring lamb because she knows the lambs are on the gain. They've been fattening on the new flush of spring grass, so they're perfect. And, Easter is coming, and so we need to have our Easter lamb. So she's not just in tune with a tradition, because a tradition is never just a tradition. It has practical value. The spring grass makes them taste better, right? It's anchored in the reality of the seasons. And she goes, and then the butchers know this, and so they display all the whole carcasses of the spring lambs. And this happens from the slaughterhouse. They drape the caul fat over the back legs. And each lamb is not just hanging there, it is displayed. And is displayed in a way that makes its provenance transparent. So they arrange the pluck, which is the liver and the lungs and the heart, in the body. They leave that in the carcass, right? Could you imagine if you found some offal meat, in a package of pork chops from the grocery store? Like, it would be horrifying. But what the housewife is looking at is how oxidized is the liver and the lungs, which will tell her how long it's been hanging there. How fresh is this lamb? Because there's no greater, metric of the passage of time than a pair of animal lungs. They just get gray and gross after a few hours. And so she was able to choose based on all of these cues because she had knowledge. She was not estranged from the provenance of her meat and how it was prepared and how it was even processed and harvested for her.
You can receive updates on all our brand new content as it's released by signing up for our email newsletter. Free download of Brandon's thoughts on meat cookery included. Go to farmsteadmeatsmith.com and sign up on the homepage. Thanks again for listening, and keep in touch.